Join the pack by clicking the link in the description down below and it'll take you to blackwolfnation.com. Use the discount code F1word at checkout to grab yourself 15% off. Hey guys, Sean here and welcome to the F1 Word. Now, over the course of the opening 10 races of the 2018 season, there has been a lot of criticism levelled at the FIA for some of the decisions their race stewards have made regarding penalties. And following Kimi Raikkonen's collision with Lewis Hamilton and the subsequent 10-second time penalty, the matter has once again been put back into the spotlight and people are venting their frustration with the decisions being made. But looking back over this season, how inconsistent have the stewards really been, and what, if anything, needs to change going forward? Let's start by having a look at the penalties dished out to drivers during qualifying and races so far this season, but a quick disclaimer. These are the penalties listed on the official F1 website, and although I couldn't find another list to confirm it, I am pretty sure one or two are missing, but these are the vast majority. Of course, these are all non-technical penalties, so Daniel Ricciardo got a 3-place grid drop for speeding under red flags in qualifying in Australia. In Bahrain, Perez and Hartley for their formation lap infringement both got 30 seconds added to their race time. Ericsson in China was another one ignoring flags. He got a 5-place grid drop. Pierre Gasly and Max Verstappen at the same event. They both got 10-second time penalties for their respective collisions. In Azerbaijan, Magnussen got the same penalty as well for causing a collision, with Sergei Sorokin getting a 3-place grid drop for Spain. Romain Grosjean got the same penalty ahead of Monaco for his incident at the Spanish Grand Prix. And then in Monaco, Brendan Hartley got a 5-second time penalty for speeding in the pit lane. In France, Sebastian Vettel got a 5-second time penalty for causing a collision, with Williams' Sergei Sorokin driving unnecessarily slowly behind the safety car, also getting a 5-second time penalty. In Austria, Sebastian Vettel got a 3-place grid drop for impeding Carlos Sainz. And during the race, Lance Stroll was given a 10-second time penalty for ignoring blue flags. And of course, as we saw at the weekend, Kimi Raikkonen received a 10-second time penalty for causing a collision, and Pierre Gasly a 5-second time penalty. So, looking at those stats and on the face of it, there does appear to be a fair level of consistency in the penalties applied. As an example, the vast majority of drivers found guilty, if you like, of causing a collision received a 10-second time penalty. However, as is often the case when you just look at the stats, that does not tell the full story. First off then, let's look at the penalties for ignoring flags. Daniel Ricciardo, as I said there, was dropped 3 places on the grid in Australia for driving too quickly and I guess therefore ignoring red flags. However, in China, Marcus Ericsson was dropped 5 places on the grid for ignoring yellow flags. Now, I suppose you could probably argue that yellow flags mean the circuit is still live and that there could be marshals or drivers on track, so I guess that could be seen as a more serious offence. But for me, it would make a lot more sense to have a standard penalty across the board for ignoring flags. I mean, Lance Stroll, he was given a 10-second time penalty for not reacting to blue flags at the Austrian Grand Prix, and that is a much bigger penalty than that given for something probably considered a much bigger infringement by Ericsson in China. So that's frustrating and that's not particularly consistent. And bearing all of that in mind, when you look at the 30-second penalties given to Perez and Hartley in Bahrain for, quite frankly, a minor infringement, alright, rules are rules, but passing on the formation lap or failing to retake the correct position is hardly worse than ignoring flags. And their penalties, in terms of time, were much harsher. But moving away from races at the moment, let's have a look at qualifying and in particular Austria and Canada. In Austria, Sebastian Vettel was handed a 3-place grid drop for impeding Carlos Sainz during qualifying, but Nico Hülkenberg and co were given no penalty whatsoever for cruising around at the end of the back straight on the racing line in Canada and impeding Sebastian Vettel. That is a far more dangerous incident when you consider the closing speeds. And Vettel said after the session that his intention was to complete the lap, but he had to back off, and therefore his lap was compromised. That is impeding. And before anybody throws the "it didn't affect the eventual outcome" argument at me, neither did the incident with Sainz in Austria. So as far as I'm concerned, for this incident, that argument is irrelevant. It's just another example of inconsistency in the decision-making process. At the end of the day, if you cause another driver to have to abandon their qualifying lap by sitting on the racing line, it should be a penalty whether it affects the eventual outcome or not. But here's what really gets me though, and I know yes this is turning into a bit of a rant, but what really gets me is that Vettel impeding Sainz was worthy of a 3-place grid drop and was exactly the same penalty Romain Grosjean received for his incredibly dangerous and stupid move in Spain that saw 2 other cars eliminated from the race. An incident that the Frenchman admitted to the stewards was entirely his fault and that he had chosen to allow his car to travel back across the track to avoid other cars. Back across the track into the oncoming field to avoid other cars. All right, Roman. So that sort of incident apparently, or at least according to the penalty given, is considered as dangerous as impeding in qualifying. Somehow I think not. Now, of course, if a driver fails to finish a race, then there has to be a penalty applied for the next round, and a grid drop does make the most sense. But 3 places is not enough, certainly for something like that, and a 3-place grid drop is almost certainly more lenient than, say, a 10-second time penalty, which could be slapped onto their race time at the end of the next Grand Prix. And again, alright, some will argue that a driver failing to finish the race is a penalty in itself, but that should never excuse actions like that of Grosjean in Spain. At the end of the day, and this is just my personal opinion, if you crash out because of an incident that you have caused, that's your own fault, your problem. And it should never be taken into consideration when giving out a penalty. And as I've already said, Grosjean's move ended 2 other drivers' races. So then, on to the penalties that have received the biggest criticism so far this season, and that is the famous 3 words, causing a collision. As I've already said, the 10-second time penalty has been the most popular one handed out for the offence, with Gasly, Verstappen, Magnussen and Raikkonen all receiving one, as well as Sebastian Vettel, of course, with Sirotkin getting a grid drop for his incident in Baku, which I still think was incredibly harsh, by the way, but I'm not going to get back into that one. And as I just mentioned as well, Grosjean getting the same for his incident in Spain. However, here is the issue, and it's the issue that so many of you have as well. In France, Sebastian Vettel was handed a 5-second time penalty for an incident with Valtteri Bottas that was clearly more damaging, literally, than the incident between Raikkonen and Hamilton at Silverstone. Bottas, he ended up with a puncture, and that also resulted in big damage to his floor, and that meant that it was probably much harder for him to recover than Hamilton at Silverstone, and indeed Vettel in France at the same event. And okay, again, yeah, Vettel damaged his own car and that meant that his race was compromised. But he caused the incident, so that should make no difference whatsoever. And look, yeah, I will defend him to a point. I know he lost front end grip and that caused the lockup, but it's still his mistake regardless. Same with Raikkonen at the British Grand Prix. And both of those should have been 10-second penalties, and that's just based on the other decisions made to that point in the season. And I have to say as well, when you consider that at the same event, Sirotkin was handed the same penalty as Vettel for driving too slowly behind the safety car, just goes to show how much of a joke not only Vettel's penalty was, but how big a joke the penalty system is becoming. And again, the other side of the argument, you know, it was the first lap so the stewards were more lenient argument. Throw that around all you like. But Kimi's incident with Lewis was also on the first lap. So, you know, I get the argument, and I do feel like the stewards should be a bit more lenient when it comes to the first lap. But if you're going to show that leniency to Sebastian Vettel, you've then got to show it to Kimi Raikkonen or to Lewis Hamilton or to Valtteri Bottas or to Marcus Ericsson, whoever. You can't just be lenient on one incident. There was a theory thrown around after the British Grand Prix, and I've got to mention it, and it was added to recently by Jacques Villeneuve as well, and that was that if Raikkonen had hit Bottas, the penalty he received would have been less severe, essentially saying that the reason it was such a hefty punishment was because it was Hamilton's home Grand Prix. And although I'm sure some of you will say that's absolutely ridiculous, let's not forget that in the past, incidents against Ferrari at Monza have often resulted in bigger penalties than at any other track. So it does happen, and history has proven that. But Charlie Whiting also made some very interesting comments after the Grand Prix, saying that although he couldn't know for sure, he wouldn't be surprised if a bigger penalty was handed to Raikkonen because of the criticism levelled at the stewards for not being harsh enough on Sebastian Vettel in France. And I, for one, really hope that isn't true, because the race stewards should not be reacting to pressure from the media and fans. That potentially sets a very dangerous precedent. They've got to deliver consistency, they've got to sort this out, but they shouldn't be making decisions on penalties based on media outcry from a previous event. That should not happen. So, what needs to change? Well, there has to be more consistency, but that is so obvious. The problem is, though, when you have different stewards for each race weekend, consistency is always going to be very difficult to deliver. And that's not to mention the fact that, as the stewards allude to themselves, no 2 incidents are the same, and every single investigation is totally open to individual interpretation and opinion. So no matter what you do, you will never get 100% consistent decisions. And that's the same with all sport. And refereeing at any level is not easy to do. As I've said many times, I still think there needs to be a team of independent stewards that travel to every Grand Prix and are responsible for all decisions when it comes to penalties over the course of the season. You know, 5, 6, 7 people who go from Australia all the way to Abu Dhabi and they make the calls. And okay, as I've already said, you're never going to get 100% consistency, but that will at least help to improve the situation. And it's the same people responsible for any good calls and any bad calls. Perhaps set penalties are an option as well. You know, causing a collision is worth a 5-second time penalty. But with that, there also has to be leeway for more severe incidents. As an example, a 5-second time penalty is probably fine for incidents similar to that between Gasly and Perez at Silverstone, but it's nowhere near enough for incidents similar to Maldonado and Gutierrez in Bahrain a few years back. So set penalties could work, but because you've then got to give leeway, the problem with that is, once again, it's open to individual interpretation and opinion, and that's going to breed inconsistency. So the stewards in that respect will be stuck between a rock and a hard place. And I have to say, in all fairness to them, me just pondering these ideas and looking at the pros and cons and arguing against and for each penalty given, just goes to show how hard a job it is for stewards to nail every single decision. And looking at Silverstone, I've had 3 or 4 days to think about this, they've got to make a decision like that. So for the FIA going forward, it's about finding that balance, trying to deliver that consistency. I know I keep using the word, but that is exactly what we need. And although 2 incidents are never the same, there are always going to be comparisons to be drawn between them. And the 2 that I keep going back to, Raikkonen at Silverstone and Vettel at France, they are 2 very similar incidents. So they should be able to draw comparisons between the 2 and come to a consistent conclusion. But if you've got 5 stewards at the French Grand Prix and a completely different 5 stewards at the British Grand Prix, then views could be different and different penalties will be handed out. I have to say as well, I do feel like they've got too many penalties to choose from, and that's adding to the problems. We've got 5-second time penalties, 10-second time penalties, drive-through, stop-go penalties, post-race time penalties, grid drops. There's just too many. And that in itself is going to give us problems with consistency. But what also needs to be said, and I suppose in defence of the stewards to an extent, it doesn't matter how consistent they manage to be or how spot on they get their decisions. There will always be people unhappy with the decisions they make. For example, Hamilton fans may well feel that the penalty given to Raikkonen would never be enough, whatever it was. Vettel fans may argue that his penalty in France was far too harsh for a first corner incident and should have been given the benefit of the doubt. And Verstappen fans may well be unhappy because they saw a gap for him to go for in China and he should be going for that gap. And that is what is great about Formula 1. Everybody has an opinion and everybody has a view. But not just the fans. The stewards will have those differing opinions as well. And that means that whatever the FIA put in place, there will always be a level of inconsistency. But there are steps that could be taken and that need to be taken to reduce that as much as possible. And perhaps 2021 is where they're looking. As is always the case, they are just my thoughts and opinions, but what are yours? What is your take on some of the penalties given this season, and what would you do to help improve consistency from the race stewards? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Just another quick heads up for you all, it is my brother's wedding this weekend, and as I am the best man, I will be busy tomorrow and Saturday. However, once this weekend is all done, I will be back to it 100% next week. No more interruptions. I will still be back tomorrow though with this week's news roundup, but it will be recorded tonight. So please do bear that in mind if any big news stories break Friday morning. And of course, don't forget to join us this Sunday for our weekly live stream. In the meantime though, you can follow me on social media. Links to Twitter, Instagram, Facebook and to Discord are all in the description down below. But as ever, thank you for watching. I've been Sean. This has been the F1 Word, and until next time, goodbye.